I'm Grace. I'm 34, and 6 weeks ago, I woke up from a grueling 9-hour spinal surgery to the sight of 73 missed calls and a world that had been sold out from under me. Still hazy from the anesthesia, I played my father's voicemail. His voice wasn't trembling. It was cheerful, chillingly so. Grace, honey, we sold your condo to pay for Madison's wedding. You were unconscious, so we just signed for you. Family helps family, right? $425,000, 8 years of double shifts and sacrifice gone before I could even wiggle my toes. My sister's influencer perfect wedding was only 3 weeks away, and while my legs felt like lead, my mind became razor sharp. I made one phone call that changed everything. What happened at that altar? No one saw coming. Before I reveal how I took it all back, I want to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the moment I realized my parents didn't just break my heart. They committed a felony. To understand how my own flesh and blood could sell my home while I was under the knife, you have to understand the dynamic of the Sullivan house. I'm Grace, the reliable one. In my family, that's just code for the one they can ignore. Since I was 18, I've been a ghost in their lives, unless a bill needed paying. I worked 3 jobs through college while my sister Madison had her sorority dues and aesthetic lifestyle subsidized by my parents' dwindling savings. When I bought my condo at 27, a modest but beautiful place in a quiet corner of San Diego, my father didn't congratulate me. He didn't bring a bottle of champagne or help me move a single box. Instead, he stood in my kitchen, looked at the granite countertops I'd skipped vacations for 3 years to afford, and sighed. It's a bit much for one person, don't you think? Grace Madison is struggling in that tiny apartment. You should have consulted us. We could have used this investment for the family. And that was the theme. My success was a family resource. But Madison's failures were unfortunate circumstances that I was expected to fix. Fast forward to 7 weeks ago. I sat in my neurologist's office and finally got the news I'd been praying for. My L4 and L5 discs were a disaster. The chronic pain had become a dark cloud following me for 3 years, making it hard to breathe, let alone work my high-pressure software engineering job. The surgery was set for March 15th. A 9-hour procedure followed by a brutal recovery. I called my mom that night, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and relief. Mom, I got the date. March 15th. I'm going to need some help those first few days after I get home. There was a long silence, then a muffled conversation on her end. I heard Madison laughing in the background, probably picking out bridesmaids' robes. Oh, Grace, my mother finally said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. March, that's peak wedding prep. Wedding. Madison is getting married in April, honey. We're swamped with the venue walkthroughs and the tastings. You've always been so independent, I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do. Click. She hung up before I could tell her I literally wouldn't be able to walk to the bathroom on my own. It was a stinging reminder I was the safety net, never the one being caught. The weeks leading up to the surgery were a blur of wedding emergencies. Madison's wedding budget had ballooned to an eye-watering $300,000. Her fiancé Matthew came from a wealthy banking family, and my parents were terrified of looking poor. They had already drained their remaining equity to give her a $22,000 designer dress. Every time they called me, it wasn't to ask about my pre-op tests. It was to ask for contributions. Grace, the floral arrangements are $15,000 more than we thought. Since you aren't traveling for the wedding because of your little back thing, surely you can chip in. I said no. I said no 3 times. I told them my medical out-of-pocket costs were astronomical. The last time I spoke to my father before the surgery, his voice had turned a shade of cold I'd never heard before. You've always been the selfish one, Grace. You sit in that expensive condo while your sister tries to start her life. Fine, we'll find the money. Don't bother calling us until you're ready to be part of this family. I went into that hospital on March 15th, feeling orphaned, but I had no idea they had already found the money. They had spent weeks scouting a cash buyer for my condo. They had found a shady notary who didn't ask questions. They waited until the exact moment they knew the anesthesia hit my bloodstream to finalize the theft of my life's work. They thought I was alone. They thought I was weak. But what they forgot is that I'm a software engineer. I keep receipts. I track every byte of data, and I've been protecting my own back long before the doctors started cutting into it. 2 days after I was discharged, I was lying on a makeshift bed in my living room, not my condo, but a small, sterile apartment I'd had to scramble to rent, with what was left of my emergency savings. Every time I shifted my weight, a lightning bolt of pain shot up my spine, but it was nothing compared to the white-hot rage simmering in my chest. My sister Madison wasn't content with just taking my money, she wanted my reputation too. I opened Instagram to find she'd posted a photo of herself in a bridal boutique, dabbing away a single staged tear. The caption read, "It's so heartbreaking when the people you love try to ruin your special day. My sister is threatening our family over a financial disagreement, right when I'm supposed to be at my happiest." Some people just can't stand to see others succeed, praying for her bitter heart. The comments were a bloodbath. Relatives I hadn't seen in years were calling me toxic, money-obsessed, and mentally unstable. My phone was a graveyard of texts from aunts and cousins telling me to just let it go for the sake of the wedding. I didn't reply to a single one. Instead, I called Christopher Evans, my attorney. "Christopher," I said, my voice steady despite the painkillers. "It's time to open the vault. I need the documents for the Maple Drive property." Christopher sighed on the other end. "Grace, I've been your lawyer for 5 years. I've kept this secret because you asked me to, but are you sure? Once this is out, there's no going back to normal with them." "Normal was a lie, Christopher," I replied. "They didn't just sell my condo, they sold me out. They used my surgery as a window of opportunity to rob me. Now I'm going to use their wedding as a window of opportunity to show them what it's like to lose everything." Here is the part my parents didn't know. Back in 2021, my father's gambling and my mother's keeping up with the Joneses' lifestyle finally caught up to them. They were $180,000 in debt, and the bank was weeks away from kicking them out of their home of 20 years. They called me sobbing, asking for a loan. I didn't give them a loan. I knew they'd never pay it back. Instead, I did something they never expected. I set up an anonymous LLC Azure Management, and I bought their debt. Then I bought the house itself through a short sale. I became their landlord without them ever seeing my face on the paperwork. For 4 years, they'd been sending their rent checks to a P.O. box, thinking they were dealing with some faceless corporate entity that had been kind enough to let them stay. I had saved their dignity. I had kept a roof over their heads while they continued to treat me like an unwanted ATM. I did it out of a misplaced sense of daughterly duty. I did it because I wanted them to love me. But sitting in that rented apartment watching Madison's likes climb while she wore a dress paid for with my stolen equity, I realized you can't buy love from people who only see you as a transaction. I looked at the lease agreement Christopher emailed over. Clause 12, termination of lease. It stated that the owner me could terminate the lease with 30 days' notice for any reason. "Draft the notice, Christopher," I said. "And I want it served. But not yet. I want them to feel completely safe. I want Madison to walk down that aisle thinking she's won. I want my parents to toast to their success at the rehearsal dinner." A week later, Madison called me. Her voice was pure honey, the kind that masks a sting. "Grace, look, I know you're upset about the condo thing, but think of it as an early wedding gift. Matthew's family is so impressed with the dowry Mom and Dad provided. It set us up for life. Why can't you just be happy for me?" "I'll be at the wedding, Madison," I said, ignoring the bile rising in my throat. "Good," she chirped. "But please don't wear that orthopedic brace. It'll ruin the photos. And try to smile. It's the least you can do after all the stress you've caused Mom and Dad." I hung up and looked at the manila envelope on my coffee table. Inside was the deed to their house, the forged power of attorney documents Christopher had recovered, and the 30-day eviction notice. The wedding was in 10 days. The stage was set. They thought they were inviting me to a celebration. They didn't realize they were inviting me to a reckoning. The wedding day was a masterpiece of stolen luxury. The venue was an elite estate in the hills draped in white orchids and glowing with crystal chandeliers. 200 guests, the elite of Matthew's banking circle, and our entire extended family sat in velvet chairs sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than my monthly car payment. I arrived late, leaning on my cane draped in a simple navy dress. I sat in the very back row, a shadow among the glittering crowd. I watched my parents in the front row, beaming with pride, and Madison floating down the aisle in $22,000 of lace, looking every bit the innocent bride she had portrayed on Instagram. As she passed me, she shot me a quick, triumphant smirk. She thought she had won. She thought I was there to wallow in my defeat. The reception was even more extravagant. The head table was elevated like a throne. My father stood up, tapping his crystal glass to silence the room. "Tonight," he began, his voice booming with self-importance, "we celebrate family. We celebrate the sacrifices made to give our Madison the day she deserves." Many people contributed to this beautiful beginning, especially those who realized that family unity is worth more than any piece of property. He looked directly at me, a challenge in his eyes. He actually expected me to nod and agree. Then, to my shock, he beckoned me forward. "Grace, why don't you come up? Tell your sister how much you support her new start." The room went silent. 200 pairs of eyes turned to me. My mother's face went pale. She knew I was a wild card, but she didn't think I'd dare speak. I gripped my cane, stood up slowly, and made my way to the stage. The walk felt like miles, but with every step the pain in my back was replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. I took the microphone. My father leaned in and whispered, "Keep it short, Grace. Don't embarrass us." I ignored him and turned to the crowd. "Thank you, Dad. You're right. We should talk about sacrifice. We should talk about how this wedding was funded." A murmur rippled through the room. Matthew's parents looked confused. Madison's grip on her bouquet tightened. "6 weeks ago." I continued, my voice steady and echoing through the speakers. "I was on an operating table for 9 hours. While I was unconscious, my parents forged my signature on a power of attorney. They sold my home, the one I worked 80-hour weeks to afford, and funneled all $425,000 into this room. The flowers, the filet mignon, that dress. It's all built on a felony." The room didn't just go quiet, it went dead. My father lunged for the mic, but Christopher Evans, my lawyer, stepped out from the side of the stage and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "But I have a wedding gift for you, Madison," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "And for you, Mom and Dad. You see, you've spent years treating me like I didn't matter. You lived in your house on Maple Drive for the last 4 years, thinking an anonymous company saved you from foreclosure. You've been paying rent to Azure Management." I pulled a manila envelope from my clutch. "I am Azure Management. I bought your debt in 2021 to keep you off the streets. I've been your landlord for 4 years. And since you've decided that family means taking what belongs to me, I've decided to stop being your safety net." I handed the first paper to my father. "This is the deed. It's in my name. And this—" I handed the second paper to my mother, whose jaw had literally dropped. "Is your 30-day notice to vacate. Your lease is terminated. You have exactly 1 month to find a new place to live with whatever is left of Madison's wedding fund." Chaos erupted. Matthew's father stood up, his face purple with rage. "Matthew, is this true? We were told this money was a family trust." Matthew looked at Madison, who was now sobbing real tears, this time the kind that ruin expensive mascara. "Madison, did you know?" She couldn't even look at him. Her silence was a confession. Matthew pulled his hand away as if she were radioactive. I didn't stay for the rest. I turned and walked off that stage, the sound of my cane tapping against the floor, the only rhythm in a room full of crumbling lives. As I reached the exit, my Aunt Susan caught my hand. Grace, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Don't be Aunt Susan, I said. For the first time in 34 years, I can finally breathe. I walked out into the cool night air. The wedding was over. The marriage was dead before the cake was even cut. And for the first time, I wasn't the one carrying the weight of the Sullivan family's lies. The weeks following the wedding felt like the slow-motion collapse of a house of cards. The fallout wasn't just a family argument, it was a social and financial execution. The marriage between Madison and Matthew didn't even last 72 hours. Matthew's family, whose entire reputation was built on the integrity of their regional banks, moved with surgical precision. They filed for an annulment on the grounds of fraud before the honeymoon luggage was even packed. Matthew sent me a brief, pained email a week later. "Grace, I am disgusted. I had no idea I was marrying into a crime syndicate. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." But the real reckoning was happening at the house on Maple Drive. My father called me every single day during that 30-day notice period. At first, he was screaming the old blustering version of himself that used to terrify me. He called me a traitor, a heartless daughter, and threatened to sue me. "With what money, Dad?" I asked him calmly during the only call I answered. "You spent it all on shrimp cocktails and Madison's silk veil. And Christopher tells me the police are very interested in that forged power of attorney. If I were you, I'd spend your energy packing boxes, not making threats." The silence on the other end was the sound of a man finally realizing he had no cards left to play. By day 25, the tone changed. My mother called sobbing, pleading for mercy. She talked about their age, their health, the memories in that house. It was the same playbook they'd used for decades, weaponizing my guilt to fund their irresponsibility. But for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. The spinal surgery had fixed my back, but the betrayal had cauterized my heart. I stood on the sidewalk on day 30, leaning lightly on my cane, watching the movers haul their furniture into a small, cramped U-Haul. They weren't moving into a new house. They were moving into a one-bedroom apartment in a part of town they used to look down on. Madison was there too, her designer clothes replaced by a cheap retail uniform. She had lost her followers, her fiancé, and her pride. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "I hope you're happy," she spat as she lugged a box of her pageant trophies past me. "You destroyed this family." "No, Madison," I said, watching a teacher and his wife, the new tenants I'd chosen, pull up to the curb. "You and Dad destroyed this family. I just stopped pretending to be the one holding the pieces together." They left that afternoon, and the silence they left behind was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. 6 months have passed since that day. I'm 35 now, and my recovery is complete. I can walk miles without a cane, and the shadow of chronic pain has finally lifted. I sold the Maple Drive house shortly after they left. I didn't want the ghosts of my childhood anymore. I took that money, combined it with the legal settlement I won from the title company that allowed the fraudulent sale of my condo, and I bought a small, modern house overlooking the ocean. It's just for me. No guest rooms for people who don't respect me. No family resources, just my space. I haven't spoken to my parents or Madison since the eviction. Aunt Susan tells me they're struggling that my father's administrative leave turned into a permanent firing once the ethics board saw the police report. I hear Madison is working 60 hours a week at a department store just to keep up with her credit card debt. Sometimes late at night, a small part of me feels a twinge of sadness. But then I remember the feeling of waking up from surgery to find my life had been stolen. I remember the Instagram posts mocking my pain, and I realized that walking away wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of survival. To anyone watching this, blood doesn't give someone a license to rob you. Family isn't a debt you spend your whole life paying off. You are allowed to be the hero of your own story even if it makes you the villain in theirs. Setting a boundary is the highest form of self-love. I'm Grace, and for the first time in my life, I am finally truly home. Grace's journey teaches us a vital lesson. Blood may be thicker than water, but respect is the foundation of any real home. Never light yourself on fire just to keep others warm. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. What would you have done if you were in Grace's shoes? Have you ever had to choose yourself over a toxic family member? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found strength in this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, your value is non-negotiable. Until next time, take care.